And so, okay, Jonty, so your story is mostly about irritable bowel syndrome and back pain. Is that right? Yeah. So when did you first start experiencing any symptoms?
Irritable bowel syndrome, it happened when I was a teenager for the first time.
Right.
I remember I was about 14 or 15 years old. And I remember the specific evenings, something was off. It was just weird. And yeah, even though, and you're young, so you just take things whatever, but I just remember something being really weird and different. And it did happen around the same time as me taking antibiotics for acne.
Right. Okay.
So over the years, when eventually I got into nutrition a bit more, they always would correlate it with that.
Right.
They would tell me it was because of the antibiotic usage, and it's a very honest correlation. That messed up the gut flora, but they never spoke about some of the other issues going on in the home, and
no, quite.
No, they didn't. But now I see it was there was a lot of that as well.
Right.
So it was about when I was a teenager, and then it got drastically better when I improved my diet.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would just kind of keep coming back all the time. I would just have flare-ups sometimes.
And at the time, presumably, you didn't know what was going on. Why you had flare-ups? No.
No, and anyone that's had IBS, they as soon as they change their diet and they see such drastic improvements, you become a bit obsessed.
Yeah.
Everyone can relate to that. So you think, you just keep going back to the food. It's the food. It's the food. So whenever there'd be a flare-up, I would blame it on the food and I would shift things. So I've been every type of diet. I've done everything.
And often, of course, when that happens and you relate it to food, then you can become conditioned so that when you eat a certain food, it automatically does create the IBS because that's what your body's learned.
Basically. Yeah, this kind of preemption is such a huge trigger.
Yeah.
Where, I'm going to get it if I eat this. And it got to the point where, I was spending weeks barely eating anything.
Really?
Yeah, it was, the IBS got really bad. So that was the IBS. And the back pain, again, there was like as with all these things, there seemed to have been a physical correlation. I started going to the gym at university, and I hurt my back. I twinged my back, and it was just a bit off, and I couldn't do it for a while. And the physio said to me, you feel like your back lifting too much weight. Just wait. A year later, I'm still in pain. I'm still waking up with pain, and it's terrible. And I must have been about 20 or 21 at the time. And I was cancelling plans with friends, and I couldn't play football. I loved playing football with my friends, and that couldn't happen. And again, I was going from doctor to doctor. I wrote about this in my book. No, I don't think I think I wrote it after I sent it to you. I remember when I was 21, this one day in particular, I took an antibiotic for my spots. I took a hay fever pill. I took a painkiller for the back pain. I had nasal spray. I had eye drops. It was
a young age to be on all that medication.
21 years old, and I remember I had to cancel football with my friends that evening, and that was like my love at the time. And I was also addicted to laxatives. So I'd taken
addicted to what?
Laxatives. People get laxatives, like the pouches and water.
Yeah.
So I'm by myself in my room. I've taken like God knows how many pills that day, and I'm drinking a laxative before bed. I'm broken. I'm defective. This system isn't working. This is before I even found the nutrition, and the nutrition took me off of some of that stuff. And eventually a doctor said to me, you've got scoliosis. Look at this MRI scan. There's a bit of a curve in your spine. Right. That's why you have back pain. I said, what do I do? And he was kind of like, you can't really improve scoliosis. You can do movement, and he suggested Pilates and yoga. So that's where I entered that world. And
that's good because you are actually now a yoga teacher, aren't you? Yeah. Yes, so actually, as we often find, there are some good things that come from all this.
Yeah.
So I just want to say hello to people. We've got quite a few people who've joined us. And Tanya, hello there. She said hello. Tanya Miller's one of our practitioners as well, as is Jonty now. So if anybody else wants to come on and say hello, but also if you want to ask any questions of Jonty and his experiences, then do that as well. And hello, we've got Louise as well. Hi, Louise. So so that was a good thing then. So good out of bad, but at least it introduced you to yoga. It
did, yeah, and also the nutrition. I'm really happy that I learned a lot about nutrition as a result of the IBS. So yeah, no, it was good, but just like with the nutrition, how I became obsessed. I became orthorexic, healthy eating obsession. The yoga as well. If I didn't do yoga or movement for 2 or 3 days, there'd be a twinge, and I go, oh yeah, it's the scoliosis. I've got so I was like on strict diets and regimented training programs. So instead of when I was 21, I was on all these pills, and that was horrible. And then 5-6 years later, I became like a self-development obsessed junkie. So it was kind of like a better version of the first one, maybe, but it was this thing of, I didn't meditate and have my green juice and have this. And, if I don't do those things every single day, then I'll have flare-ups and I'll have back pain. So it's a very tricky way how it came to bit me in the bum.
Yes, interesting. So presumably you're finding those were helping a little bit anyway, or helping to manage the symptoms that you had.
Basically, I'd say manage. Because, there's a term, I'm sure everyone here has heard about it, spiritual bypassing.
Not everybody will, so do explain.
I'll explain it, spiritual bypassing. So spiritual bypassing is when we become addicted to doing self-development things, like the yoga and the nutrition or cold immersion, and cold immersion is another great thing to do. And we bypass the emotional and mental work. We bypass actually learning how to express emotions or to resolve things from our past. I think in the House of Health, in the SERPA program, you spoke about emotional, behavioral, physical, and spiritual. You call it spiritual, don't you?
Yes. Oh, yes.
So it's often people in the yoga industry do this. It's a very common yoga teacher thing, where you're doing the physical in the yoga, and you're doing the spiritual. So you're doing the I feel good and we're all connected, but you're not doing the emotional and the behavioral. You're judging everyone. You can't really deal with your anger, because there's this thing in yoga as well about seropositivity. It's not really about you. Anger and judgment is bad. You can't do that anymore. You just have to be happy or pretend to be. So you spiritually bypass.
Yeah, and shoving down the emotional stuff.
The other stuff. Yeah, and it's because I'm in a yoga studio as I say this, because the yoga gives the impression that everything is fine as long as you wear the yoga pants and do the shapes in the room. Often people will go years without realizing they're doing it. They won't know. They'll have pain and they'll go, oh, I didn't get to my yoga practice this morning. And it will just be this constant ping pong. Yeah. I was stuck in that.
So how did you get yourself out of that?
Well, it got to a point where I was like, there must be something else. I tell you what it was. There were friends around me that could kind of do what they wanted. They could eat what they wanted, and they were fine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I was very into epigenetics. I think this is let's really go into the start of it. I read Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief, which is a fantastic book, and it speaks about epigenetics. For those of you that don't or haven't read it or don't know what epigenetics is epi means above and genetics means genes, so it means above the genes. And in the book, Bruce Lipton speaks about how our lifestyle will determine whether certain genes turn on or off. And I was like, I'm just defective. I just have my IBS and I just have the scoliosis. And whereas this book was telling me, no, there's things that you're doing to turn on those genes. And I was like, but I'm doing all the right things. Am I doing the right things?
And the environment around us as well.
Yeah, basically he spoke about that, and then I was like, wow, that's cool. And then his publisher was called Hay House. It's called Hay House. And I was like, what else is in this? What else is it? And there's a man named Joe Dispenza who's written a couple of books, You Are the Placebo and Becoming Supernatural. And that spoke about meditation and about the effect that has on the system. And there's hundreds of testimonials online about people using his work, not just getting over IBS and back pain, but cancer and like chronic tumor. I don't know if you've seen any of this, Georgie.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it. Yeah.
And it was just, I was like, why isn't this on every news channel in the world? This is...
And it's always comes down to the not enough evidence base, basically. That's always the case. And there is certain evidence, but some people would call it pseudoscience. So, yeah. But epigenetics, there's a lot of evidence around epigenetics itself, definitely. And absolutely, the beliefs, his book is called Biology of Belief, Bruce Lipton's book, and that demonstrates just how important beliefs are in the way we live, in things that we do, in symptoms that we have. So moving on then, what did you start doing that started making a difference for you?
So I had been seeing an IFS therapist for a while. He was actually... IFS is Internal Family Systems. Sorry for everyone. Yeah. IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. It's a great modality. And I'd been seeing a therapist for many years. He was my meditation teacher once upon a time. He's a great man. And I started seeing correlations with... As a brief summary of those of you that don't know what IFS is, you identify different subpersonalities in your mental system, and you start to develop a new relationship with them. So I started to develop new relationships with my fear and with my anger, and in doing so, like a better relationship. Like I thanked them, and I wasn't trying to get rid of them. And in doing so, I noticed the pain would get weird. It got weird. It got erratic. And I was like, wow, there must be more to this. And at the time, I was also reading Joe Dispenza's book, Becoming Supernatural. And he has you doing these 45-minute meditations every day. And I was already doing a meditation practice, but never that long. So I would do these meditations, and I would do this kind of internal dialogue in the meditation. And it was amazing what started to happen. I was like, wow, I really started to feel, and I think the ultimate goal of meditation and yoga, even though people don't use it as this, is to really see when you have an emotion, is to become very intuitive. Emotion, pain. You really have an opportunity with meditation to do that. And when you meditate for 45 minutes, you're like in it. You drop in every single day. That started making shifts. And then the next thing I did, because he spoke all about empowerment, Joe Dispenza, was like, how can I hack it? I'm still going to do the meditation, but what happens during the day? Is there something else I'm missing? And I just kept doing research about it. And then I came across John Sarno, as everyone does eventually.
Not everybody, unfortunately, but
many
aren't ready for it.
In our community, John Sarno. And obviously the books, I'm like, okay, the personality types. Great. Who's doing this in England? And then I found your TED Talk.
All right. Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. So when you started our training, how far on were you with your own journey with your IBS and your back pain?
Gone.
Right. So how long did that take for that to settle down? And when was it settling down in all that you were doing? When was it settling down?
I'd say from start to finish, when I really felt this thing of like, oh, it's gone, was about 6 months.
Right. Okay.
About 3 months in, I think you and I spoke on the phone for the first time. And you said something to me, I can't remember what exact words, but you're like, you're doing really well. I think you're good. You even said to me, I think you should do the training. I
could tell from them that you were intuitive and that you were really working well on your own, on yourself, and you were a yoga teacher. and therefore you sounded so enthusiastic, as I'm sure everybody is recognizing here with this talk, that it was very clear that you were keen to spread the word as well, and it was a way to do that.
Certainly. I think I just needed feedback. I needed someone to tell me, with your experience, no, it's good. And I really value that, particularly when I've been working with clients, that sense of community. Like you need someone to just tell you're on the right path and you're good. And that really helped. As soon as you said that, I was like, I suddenly went, wow, it's true. I eat what I want. I do what I want. I was even, and this is the thing with yoga, I really started to recognize this with my students, how they would have certain pains or whatever. And I'd go, another downward dog is not necessarily what you need anymore. And it didn't, yoga is a beautiful space, but I was like, no, I can offer so much more. And I prefer to offer the one-on-one stuff. Really.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So, okay, just want to say hello again to everybody who's watching. And if you've got any questions at all, then even if it's not about just what Jonty's saying, but anything that you want to ask, but obviously, if you want to know a little bit more about what Jonty's story and what he did, then especially if you've had IBS, then do let us know. So, chronic pain-wise, then, were you still getting pain while you were doing yoga? It sounds like you were. And if you had pain, that you felt it was because you haven't done enough yoga, for example.
That's basically enough yoga, and then I got into the place of people in yoga do get to this space where you realize that yoga as a movement practice doesn't offer you everything. As a spiritual practice, as something to relax, it's got a lot. But there's no pulling movements. I'm going to get technical. There's no pulling movements in yoga. So when it comes to actually strengthening the body, I would go away and I would do pull-ups or some sort of like deadlifts. I would do something to help balance the body better. And people, not everyone, but a lot of people in yoga, they eventually realize, okay, it's like a yin and a yang. Mm-hmm. The yoga being the yin, even though there are some yang-y elements, there's faster things, but the yang is more like, go for a run, go rock climbing, go do something else to invigorate the body. So if my back pain was hurting, I was like, oh, is it yoga or is it that I need to do a bit of weightlifting or something? I was getting to that sort of place. And making a thing out of that, I suddenly went, oh, the scoliosis is happening because I need to strengthen the muscles, not stretch the muscles.
Mm-hmm. So did they say that they felt that you had your scoliosis from teen years? Was this something that often teenagers develop? Or did they say it was postural or
I was 21 when I did the scan. He did not give much background. He said you possibly had it all your life. He wasn't very. It was a GP. All GP practices are packed constantly, and this one in particular, it was like, you got scoliosis. Yeah.
So when he gave you that diagnosis, was that something that you were concerned about, or were you okay with that?
This is an interesting question because it's something now that I recognize as being a diagnostic trap, where you feel this initial relief because you're going from doctor to doctor, and even though they're not necessarily saying it out loud, they're basically saying, you're making this up. You're making this up, this isn't real. And then eventually they go, it's scoliosis, and you go, oh, thank God. Thank God, you found the thing, and now I know I'm not crazy. So
you Google. And then you Google.
And then you're like, I've got this. Find all the other people that have this. And you find that everyone else that has it, mostly, unless they're in the mind-body community, it's just victim toxic pain groups.
Yeah.
What do I do with this? And it's mostly, about managing symptoms as opposed to actually healing symptoms. There's not a lot of empowering information, unfortunately. There wasn't.
Okay, and now, of course, you recognise that that scoliosis is just what you've always had, and you had it before you had pain, and it's a normal abnormality. Yeah,
and I think it's just such a shame that doctors are who doctors are. I think they're great for emergency medicine. I just think we're putting too much on their plate. Where
I think the difficulty really is that, you know, they and any clinician is doing the best they can with the information they have.
Yeah.
And if the person diagnosing you doesn't have a training in, you know, how to deal with mind-body conditions, stress-induced conditions, then how can they even consider it? And sadly, that is often the case. And if they don't know of the evidence, and again, that's sadly the case, that a lot of people don't know the actual pain science that's going around, that has been done. So it's not that they're doing anything wrong, but how can they tell you anything different if they don't know? And I think that's something, and that's where we need to go, is actually really raising awareness within the medical profession.
Yes, that's a no.
Yeah, which is where the Dan Hinsley and Penny George's work is going. It's Mind Body Medicine website to try and raise awareness and get it out there within the medical community.
Wonderful.
So I just want to look back. We've got Louise is saying hi to you both. Would love to say, sorry, Shaheen Jeffrey saying hi to you both. She'd like to stay, but she's got her hands full. Oh, because her mum and son both have come down with COVID. Poor things. Look forward to watching it on replay when I get a few moments to myself. Amazing that you got better, Jonty. So happy for you. Oh, so sorry, Shaheen. And yes, hopefully everybody will be better soon, and none of you get it either. But so okay, so Shaheen, another cert practitioner, and another one, Lucy Appleby, cert trained. Yes, she says all resonates. Lifetime of back pain. Got worse as she got older, but only at the start of the journey. And having read she's only at the start of this journey. Having read John Sarno, was hoping for immediately cure. Absolutely, and not had it, as many of us don't, and therefore now working through it. So I'll come on to the rest of yours in a moment, Lucy. But I think that's the thing is. In fact, let me do it now before I forget. So first of all, she says she wants the author of the writer of Becoming Supernatural. That was Joe Dispenza, wasn't it?
Joe Dispenza. Yeah,
with a Z, Dispenza. But quite often that happens, that people do have what we call book recoveries. You know, they read the book and then they recover. And I don't necessarily think that's the best way, because they don't learn anything, do they, Jonty? And if they face, you know, I do see people who actually come back, you know, have had a book recovery, and then either months or years later, they approach one of us, and certainly I've been approached by many, who, when they've been under a lot of stress again in the future, they've just thought, oh, right, pain's come back, so I better read the book. And this time it doesn't necessarily go. Or maybe they do a little bit of journaling, but maybe the pain doesn't go. And somebody I know did this for years, literally 12 years. Every time she told the pain to go away and read the book, it would go, until in the end, because she'd not actually learned how to deal with emotions, or apart from the odd, no, actually this lady had not journaled at all. But because she hadn't learned, you know, I believe this is a personal development journey, then she was in a really, really bad way by the time she came to me, because she hadn't been dealing with any of the underlying emotions over those years, just sort of pushing through it. No, I can do this, and just kept reading the book. And luckily for her, each time it helped until it didn't. Until it didn't.
I think you mentioned this, and I don't want to put naming other books. Steve Osinich's book. Like a lot of the book, he spends like he just pushes through the pain. Yeah. And yeah, I suspect it's more of a muscle that you have to kind of grow over time. It changes your whole life. It's not just about your pain.
And I think it's about recognizing that some people can push through the pain, and sometimes I think it's a subtle thing. In fact, I'll give you an example of a time when I was doing this early on, and when I climbed over a stile and I went over on my ankle. And it was up in one of the Yorkshire Peaks. So there was no reception on my phone. I was with my daughter, and I jumped over the stile and went over on my ankle, and I was in agony, and I couldn't put my foot to the ground. Now, it was pretty soon after I'd come across Dr. Sarno's work, and I had been talking to my family about it. So my daughter was saying, well, just imagine the blood flow going to the ankle and all the oxygen going to your ankle. And I was going, yes, I'm trying, but it's not helping. And I actually sat down and asked her to be quiet while I just went into my head, really. And because at that point, I didn't know whether I had injured myself or not. And I certainly wasn't going to take my boot off to check, because if it had been swollen, I might not get it back on. But what I did then was I just sat quietly and allowed myself to feel how I felt. Now, this was 12, 13 years ago, but I just intuitively knew that if I was just getting the oxygen there and telling myself to walk through, it wasn't working. I needed to think of something else. And what I did was actually sit and listen to my inner child. And I remember actually imagining myself at about 4 years old, snuggled up to me, and I was listening to how she felt first of all, and then just reassuring her and just saying, you know, it is a really tough time. You know, it is tough, I know, but you know what? This is not a great time to be playing up. Okay, if you imagine that it's, you know, your vulnerable inner self that's manifesting symptoms, because actually the last thing I'm going to do on the top of a mountain is to burst into tears when there might be other people around, or fall apart or whatever. So for me, it was important to just sort of keep it. And also I had my daughter with me. I don't want her to see me like that. And so I was doing well at coping with the emotions that clearly were surfacing, because I must have been thinking about all the rubbish that was going on at that time. And so I just literally reassured myself and just said, look, I kept it light, saying, you know, there's no reception. I'm not going to be helicoptered off here, and just kept it really light and just really gently saying, you know what, when we get home, we'll do some meditation. I promise we'll do some journaling. We'll look at everything then, but now's not a good time. So why don't we see how we go? And I just gently got up and I started walking very gingerly. And within 10 minutes, the pain had gone completely.
Amazing.
Okay? And I carried on, and there was no swelling, no nothing by the end of the day. It was clearly an acute mind-body response. And I must have been, as I was going on the walk, and especially going over the stile, I must have been thinking about all the rubbish that was going on. And then it was literally jumping off, and you wouldn't need, you know, we know where our feet are on the ground. You know, there was no need for my ankle to go over, but I didn't know if my ankle had gone over and that was, but had then caused damage. I knew the ankle going over was because I wasn't concentrating, that I was in my head, but whether I damaged myself, I didn't know. So, but then I couldn't do much else other than focus on me, how I was feeling, not going into the fear, calm my breathing down, feel the emotions, etc. And Louise has just said, that's amazing. Did you keep your promise to journal later? I did, Louise. Went home, I journaled, I had a hot bath, I relaxed and I meditated. But what is interesting is when I've told this story before, I tell people that when I actually got up and started walking, I actually visualized myself putting my younger self on my shoulders as I started walking, telling her we're going to be fine. But do you know what? I don't think I ever took her off.
To this day, you mean?
My inner child probably fell off, you know, on the mountain somewhere. She's probably still there, because I know I didn't forget. I didn't remember to actually. Now, these days, I encourage people to sort of imagine that you put your inner child in next to your heart, in your heart space. But no, I didn't think of that. Anyway, we've got another question here. So, Joel, great talk, really valuable listening to your experience. I've read many books and tried many things. I end up with shelves of options, but disorientated by it all. How did you eventually settle on the habits that work for you? So, Jonty, how would you answer that?
Is it a bit dark? Should I try and get a light, by the way? Hold on.
It is a bit dark, but I thought you couldn't do anything about it.
I've got a torch on my phone. Let's see if that doesn't look too ridiculous. Hold on.
Or shall I put all my lights off so it's not so obvious?
No, that's what the torch looks like. Okay. Difference. Okay. The question, how did I settle on?
Yes, when a lot of people say that when they read all the books and then they start doing things, that they feel completely overwhelmed by all the options, all the things that they could do. Okay. So how did you settle on the habits that you felt, or develop habits from things that you felt worked for you?
Well, okay, so I think that's why it comes back to, it certainly helped that I'd already been meditating and doing that. So I just kind of jumped straight into that. I'd already overcome a lot of the sticking points that people feel in the early days of meditation. And so at that point, it was a no-brainer. I mean, it was like meditate. I was like, yes, done. The journaling was a bit more of it took a bit more convincing. But what I did notice, in answer to what did I decide on, was I created non-negotiables every single day, and it was very easy for me to meditate in the morning and open my eyes and then journal for 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. It was like I can do that every single day, those two things. And this teacher of mine that I said my IFS meditation mentor, he always spoke about our day being in, he calls it parentheses, he's American, so let's call it brackets. He says, put your day, let's say it's a Monday, in brackets. Every day is in brackets. Then before and after the brackets is when you meditate and you journal. And then maybe after you have a bath, you relax. In between is when you pretend to be Jonty and I'm a character and I have feelings and all this kind of stuff. And then every single day you just make sure you're on either side of the bracket. So I realized.
So I'm you got somebody here?
Yeah, it's because it's a yoga studio.
All right, you're thinking you should be there talking to them.
Hold on 1 second.
Oh. So I think we'll ask Jonty to explain that a bit more, actually, because I think I got a little bit confused as to the brackets.
I'm so sorry.
Yes, he's in his yoga studio, so when people are passing by, I think they think he could be there for them.
Oh, I should sit somewhere else. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. Don't worry. So, Jonty, can you just explain again the parenthesis or the?
I'll explain it again. Okay. So it's and it helps as a meditation concept. He said put your day in brackets every single day, and before and after the brackets. So let's say you wake up at 8 in the morning. Okay. The first hour or two is before the first bracket.
Right, okay.
That's dedicated to your meditation and your journaling and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. And then let's say the last bracket is after you have dinner. Mm-hmm. So it's at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Everything after that as well is dedicated towards self-care. Right. And this mentor of mine is someone I really respect, and he's just been doing all this kind of stuff for 40 years. And he spoke about, like, teachers of his, if you don't dedicate the morning and the evening to that, the brackets become bigger if you make the brackets too big. And then before you know it, like even 4 or 5 days of not doing that, sticking to that, you're reacting to things and you're projecting and you're being triggered. And it's just, so no, every day it's like a non-negotiable brackets before and afterwards. I'm finding it even more so actually being the therapist for other people now. If I don't, I have to do that in the morning and the evening. Whatever it is. So maybe back in answer to like, what did I decide on? It was like meditation and journaling every single morning. Even if the journaling, I didn't feel as if anything was happening. I just did anything. It's like, that's before the brackets. And then the evening as well. The evening, and this is a personal choice for each person. The evening, I didn't want to meditate and journal. I didn't want to do that. So I was like, what, from a recovery of pain standpoint, can I do to help the symptoms? And for me, it was playing my guitar and singing. It was doing a creative outlet. Yeah. It was doing a creative outlet. It was like routines, like a shower or a bath, and distract myself. And this is something, as someone who used to be a self-development junkie, it was always self-help. Or like, I have to read John Sarno's book. I have to read Joe Dispenza's book. I have to do something. And this mentor of mine was like, watch stupid things. Yeah. Watch something. Watch. To me, it was comedy. So it was like shower, guitar, sing, watch Eddie Izzard.
Right.
I did that it was meditation, comedy every single day.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and within your yoga, anyway, you would already be including the self-soothing, the breathing, the calm breathing, and exercise. So that would already be in your day, because that's something I would, be saying. It's about acknowledging and expressing emotions, today's past stuff, if necessary. Although whatever happens in the day often triggers past stuff that then we can journal about, as well as self-soothing, so calming. Slowing our breathing down, emotional awareness, that sort of thing. I think those sort of two aspects are very important to be.
Perfect. I'm going to add another thing.
Having fun and playing and creativity, like you said. Being creative. Mm-hmm.
And then there was other non-negotiables. I had weekly non-negotiables, and I had daily ones and weekly ones.
Okay.
And another daily one, which was, of course, it was always getting away from the screen. So it was always being in nature to some degree. I was living in Israel, so it was like walking along the beach. Or if I'm in England, I'll always go to the park. I'm near a park, so I'll always walk through the park. And then the weekly ones, the weekly non-negotiables were no work, no self-development at all on this day and that day. Just hanging out with friends, no screens. I would just do that. And then I think if that's all in one thing, the thing that encompassed all was if it doesn't work or whatever, or I don't get a chance to do whatever, is no big deal. I think it was developing that as well was big for me. Cultivating like sense of if I don't get the exact bracket thing and I don't get a chance to watch comedy, or all right, I'm not defective. That disempowering mantra is one. It's okay if I miss things.
But I think that's important because especially people with TMS tend to really like routine and like to have routine through their day. But actually, when you make it too much of a routine, if they miss it, then oh my goodness, then there's the guilt and perfectionism, overly conscientious. No, you're not succeeding in that. So it can cause pressure, more pressure. So having that idea of yes, this is what I aim to do, but having that flexibility. If you don't do it, then that's fine. Okay, what can I learn from that? How could I improve on it next time? Rather than, you stupid idiot, you should have done it.
Flexibility is a great word that you used. When I realized that this was a neuroplastic thing, when I realized, okay, I'm actually learning French. I'm learning to play the guitar. Like this is not, take the pill and it's going to go away. This is going to take time. How does it help to learn French? You do a little bit every single day. You don't give yourself a hard time if you don't. Create milestones for yourself, which are gradual. Like in the first week, you really only expect yourself to say bonjour, je m'appelle Jonty. You don't. You don't think you're going to be fluent living in Paris. And I made that. Oh, it's a skill like this. Okay. Celebrate the fact that you can say bonjour, je m'appelle Jonty. So I would celebrate the fact that I didn't complain about pain this week to my friends. That was the thing. And then the next week it was like, I was kinder to myself when pain arose. It was just, you use the word accepting, and it's important that it's a distinction, because if you're used to pushing away your fear or just telling your inner child to go away, to suddenly tell someone to be grateful and happy and you're here, pain's here again, it's a jump. It's a really big jump. So if you can just go from being negative to being neutral, or just be accepting, all right, that's like it's easier to accept it than to think that you have to be over the moon about it.
Yes, I think that people do struggle with that, even just that acceptance. They feel like if they're accepting it, they're accepting they'll never get better. And that's not the case at all. And it's like, worse than that is surrendering. If I surrender to my pain, it'll take over. No, on the whole, in war, for example, when you surrender, then it's okay, the fighting stops. And it's what we resist persists. So if you sort of back off, then there's nothing to fuel the pain. So it tends to calm down. Another nicest thing that can be done is to feel, when you do succeed if you're wanting to develop a habit, to actually feel a positive emotion when you do that particular thing, whether it's actually you spend a few minutes remembering to, maybe if you were in your head sort of ruminating about something, and you remember to actually pause, slow your breathing down, feel, reassure yourself, move on, then that's a yes, or just feeling really good, because we know that emotion actually means that those neural pathways strengthen. And that's what we want. So even just that little sort of whoopee, you did that, can be really helpful, because you're more likely then to develop that as a habit and then as an actual ritual. And a ritual is like cleaning your teeth before you go out in the morning. Rather than just being a habit, a ritual is you wouldn't go, well, most people wouldn't go out of the house without cleaning their teeth. And so if you can get into a ritual of meditating or journaling or just doing something to be kind to yourself, it could be really helpful.
Yeah, I like that distinction, the difference between habit and ritual. Because it becomes second nature all of a sudden. And it's amazing how how easily you fall back in. I mean, it's in I don't know, in Buddhism maybe, the goddess of illusion is called Maya, and how you learn, accept your fear, accept your pain, accept whatever, and it's crazy how quickly you can fall back into that illusion of self when you're resisting a thought or an emotion, and you'll catch yourself 2 weeks later. You're like, oh my god, I've not liked the fact that I've been having confronting thoughts for the last 2 weeks. Oh yeah, I've got to accept it. I'm going to be fine. If I accept this, it's not going to make me, people think if they accept their sadness, they're going to be depressed. If they accept these thoughts, I'm not going to fall into a hole. It's actually the thing that I need to do. It happens to me all the time. Sometimes
the more tired we are, the more stressed we are, the more likely we fall back into old habits, because these are neural pathways that lie dormant. And that's why, for example, why some people who have recurring pain, because these are neural pathways that when we're stressed, it's triggered. And the same thing. It's like somebody who smokes, and they give up smoking, but maybe when they get really stressed at some point, that old urge is still there. And so I think it's about not being so hard on ourselves. And in fact, I find it really helpful to just, on the self-compassionate side of it, to, be that person, that part of you that's actually reassuring yourself and using endearments and just saying, you're doing a really good job there. Even if it's like a parent who's got a child having a tantrum and they're just beside themselves, don't know what to do, to actually have a little voice in there saying to themselves, do you know what, this is tough, but you're doing so well, keep it going, you can do this. That's like having somebody there with you saying that, but we're saying it to ourselves, and this is learning to be self-compassionate, isn't it?
Yeah, massive. I'd say on my journey to recovery, those weekly milestones, it gave me a chance to kind of celebrate the small wins. And I also surrounded myself with lots of people. I was reading like Joe Dispenza's book, and I was watching like Abraham Hicks videos, which is all about positivity, and I was getting on the forums, and eventually I spoke to you, and it was also that immersed myself with lots of mentors and people going through the same thing as me, like a community, and that was a huge part of the eventual recovery.
I think at this point, but by the way, if anybody wants to ask any questions, do, and otherwise we'll just keep chatting. But I think there's a subtle difference there that I think is worth making a point at the moment. In that, what you did, great, immersing yourself in it and that positivity, reading success stories. But then there's a fine line between somebody who's searching and looking for this book, and I want to read that book, and I'm looking at every single story in that forum, and they're doing that program and this program, and they're so busy doing and trying that they're not spending time just being and taking time out to work on themselves, and that's very common, unfortunately, as well, and causes people to be stuck.
Self-development obsession. It was. I'd have a tendency to just kind of go, and then all of a sudden the mind-body thing becomes another obsession.
Yes, and then it's watching for that, isn't it?
Yeah, and then that's no good.
Yeah.
Like I would watch Abraham Hicks videos once upon a time. I don't know if anyone knows who she is.
Yeah, well, I used to watch those. Yeah.
Yeah, Esther, and I noticed in it, and it helped me for a time, and then eventually, I kind of got what I wanted from this, and I became part of this emailing list, and I was like, people have been going to these things for years. Like you become a disciple of things, and it was, and that I found intriguing. I was like, no, I would never. Yeah. That is just some kind of loop. You get into a loop where you're reliant on it all of a sudden. It's not really about that for me.
So you mentioned, in fact, one of the questions I always ask clients, actually not clients, but people I do a 30-minute call with, where I'm just offering my services for half an hour to just see how they might progress, how they might answer some questions and guide them as to what might be worthwhile for them moving forward. And one of the things I say is, having read these books, then we know that there are three main causes of TMS, mind-body syndrome, neural pathway disorders, whatever you want to call them. And this is childhood stress and trauma, adult stress and trauma, and our personality, beliefs, behaviours, and often that's just an easy way in to encourage people to sort of see whether they have connected with what was relevant for them. Which do you feel, for the listeners, which do you feel were which ones were relevant for you?
The personality, perfectionist, people pleaser, those two in particular. They were quite prevalent. And then if we're going to speak adverse childhood experiences, I had a very loving environment. I think when I first read about that, I thought, well, what could have been wrong? I do. Then when I started to get more, I started to communicate more with the IFS and the journaling, I realized, my mum has she has really strong control issues. And my father has gone through a lot of trauma in his life. So even though there was a loving environment, the way that they behaved with each other, the way that I was like, there is, and I'd started to learn. I mean, I was always told IBS was emotional, but no one ever told me what to do with it. You know, I don't know if anyone else struggles with IBS, but one of the things I was told is about control. You need to let go. The intestine's about letting go. I'm like, letting go of what? What am I controlling? And when I understood being raised by someone that was very controlling, like you never know where can I put the plate here? Can I not put the plate here? You never know how you're meant to be. Your little child brain, who just wants love and adoration from the parent, decides that I'll only get love if I control myself. I have to control myself. I have to be a certain way around people. And only when you start to realize how you're speaking to yourself, do you go, oh wow, I'm remarkably controlling. And this is how, and you realize this in epigenetics, how like Crohn's runs in the family, or certain diseases run in the family, because you just inherit the same personalities. So people pleaser and perfectionist. I guess perfectionist will kind of be like OCD, you know. From
Okay. Yeah. No, that's interesting, and I think it's always interesting to recognize that within our parents, because your parents were you are who you are because of your experiences in life, and your parents are who they are because of their experiences in life. And therefore it's bound to impact on our behaviors, the way we act. And then it's passed down through the generations. So you've got to that point where you recognize this now, so you can then do something about it.
Yeah, easily. And it's that thing with journaling, how you kind of, I would notice these shadow parts of me, and I'd allow them to speak. And then the empathic parts of me as well, because I'd watch my mother's parents, my grandparents, and see, oh wow, they're just, how long has this been going on for? So you see it, you know, I'm not saying it to anyone, but keep going, wow, we're all just doing the same thing. And it becomes so clear as an adult, and then you realize that the children that live in our brain, they're just living that on autopilot. They're living that reality on autopilot. So it's beautiful, that moment you had with your inner children. They just want you to parent them, reparent them. Really. So
you've been doing some more work on yourself, haven't you? And now training to do the internal family systems. And this is where it is all about having this family within you of different parts.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not only something that is abstract. Like, what's magical about IFS, anyone that's had it can attest to this, is you actually see kids. You don't have to try and force it. They come. They just show up. And often they're petrified of you at first.
Yeah.
They're not used to seeing you.
And that brings us to this. Sorry, Jonty. I just think that brings us to what was it Louise who said? Did you keep your promise to journal later when I'd been on my ankle had gone over? And yes, I did, because that's why it's so important, isn't it? Because we've ignored our inner child for so long that we need to be able to teach them to trust again, show that we are there for them and that we can. And I remember one lady who'd had an extreme amount of trauma in her life, childhood and adult life. And when she first did a guided visualization with me, with her inner child, where she met her in her bedroom, she was at the door of the bedroom. Now, most people can do this quite easily, but she was in the doorway and she could see her inner child in a corner of the room with her back to her, and she could only see it in black and white. And it took her a month of being able to do this and to talk to her inner child every day to just gently do this, to build a relationship with her inner child, to get to the point where she could sit on the bed next to her, and so she was sort of close enough, and it was, she could see it in full color. And that was, for me, that was very powerful as well. And you could really see, because she's such a strong woman, and she would shut everything down and she'd just get on with everything. Her daughter had died and she didn't talk about her daughter for years. It's her way of coping. And yet this is not looking after her emotional needs, which is like, you know, imagine that inner child within us. So it's really important, as you say, to develop that relationship and build the trust up as well.
Yeah, really. And it takes time, but ultimately it's a beautiful process. What was I going to say? It's a beautiful process, and the next thing slipped my mind, so I'm not going to say it now.
Well, let you have a think while I just read what we've got now. So Louise says, I can see how I've learned and inherited chronic pain from my family members and extended family. And not just chronic pain, but patterns. You can see patterns, can't you? But yeah. So as Louise says, it's a family of TMS. So she said, I thought we were genetically set up for bad knees, etc., but not quite. I thought we were genetically set up for bad hips, and I remember I'd treat people, and every time I moved in a certain way on my with the plinth that I was working on, there'd be a loud audible clunk in my hip. And I honestly thought that was, oh, well, my father's got a bad hip, my sister's got a bad hip, so this just runs in the family. And then when I started doing this work and worked on me first, I just wasn't working specifically on my hip, but I just realized a few months later that, oh, I can get up from a chair without hobbling. And I wasn't aware of it initially until it had gone, or I wasn't aware it had gone until it wasn't there anymore.
I think that's what I love about this compared to the things I used to do, was it's not drastic epiphanies aren't necessary. What do I mean by that? I don't mean epiphany. I mean like drastic experiences, peak experiences. They're not necessary. You don't have to. It's like the pain and then it's gone. It's more like a gradual, subtle. One morning you wake up and you're like, oh yeah, then it's done. Yeah. For a couple of days. It's a much gentler way to go about things.
But teaching people to be gentle about it, that's tough. Because if you've got somebody who's overly conscientious and hypervigilant, hyper-rational and trying so hard, feels completely wrong for them to just go, okay, I let go. Okay, I surrender. Because there's that, oh no, they've got to keep trying to get better. And sometimes the trying has been really good. So they've searched and they've come across this work, for example, and then we're saying, no, now you've actually got to let go. And come out of the head and into the body. And that can be tough, can't it?
It can be, yeah. 100%.
Okay, so is there anything, Jonty, from your experience that you would advise people, maybe an insight that you gained that you would advise people going through a similar journey?
Just one thing.
Go on then.
Anyone going through a similar journey?
You can do 2 or 3 if you want.
Well, no, there's a bunch of things, but I think what helped me the most, there were standout points, and where I was like, oh wow, this is definitely the thing, and it was always in relation with someone else. It was always because of a community. Yeah. It was always because I saw this testimonial, or I spoke to you on the phone and you told me, you're pretty good. It was always because of community. So I'd say that. I know, I spoke with Louise about the podcast, and I know there's a podcast being started.
Louise Broder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Louise Broder about the podcast. The more you can just that, I think. Community. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Jonty. I really appreciate you coming to tell your story, and I'm sure other people will as well. I know they will. And thank you, everybody, for your questions and for listening. And I hope it's helpful for you, as well as people who are going to watch the recording, which I'm sure many people will. So thanks again, Jonty. Thank you, everybody. And we're going to leave you now.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.